Hello, everyone. I'm Julianne Meyer. You are watching Own Your Wellness, and before we get started, I gotta tell you, presenting at a conference coming up soon. So I'm a little nervous about that. It's my first time doing something like that, and it's for entrepreneurs of all walks. So if anybody's interested, there's still some VIP tickets available that I can get you. So feel free to reach out to me. It's in Denver, Colorado, coming up in June, right before my wedding. Woo woo! So it must be good if I'm going right before my wedding. Anyway, I'm really excited about today's guest. He and I were able to connect actually not that long ago, and he just touched my heart, and I know he's going to touch yours. And so I'm excited to have him here today. His name is Bret Magpiong. There we go.
All right.
It was so funny. I was like, I've got it. And then I'm like, I don't got it.
Well, it's funny, Julianne, because throughout my life, the first day of class in any school grade, it would be they'd go through the roll, and I knew when they started to get to the M's, I was just going to have to raise my hand and say here, because they hardly ever. Yeah, exactly. I'm here.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm going to be changing my last name soon. It's like, okay, now nobody can get Julianne right. Now they won't be able to get my last name right either. I'm like, okay. It'll be interesting. But anyway, enough about that. I would love for you to share a bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on the show. I'm thrilled to be here today. Definitely. Bret Magpiong, as you said, I am a Southern California native. Grew up here in Southern California. I currently live in Redondo Beach. I've been married for over 30 years. I've got an adulting daughter these days who is launched down in South Florida in the hospitality industry, and got a golden retriever that I take out every single day. And 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to step away from a great career that I had in the wealth management space. I retired at the end of 2021 and moved into another phase of my life, which is coaching and speaking and giving back and writing as well. I wrote a book that's going to launch on Amazon next week, it turns out. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's really exciting. A lot of people take retirement as a time to slow down, relax, kick back, and you just took it up a notch and reinvented into being of service in another way. So I want to commend you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't have to look the same way, right?
Yeah, I read a book several years ago. It's called Halftime, and the premise of the book was that life is two halves, if you will. And the first half, this author said, we work towards success, and the second half, he proposed we should be working towards significance. I actually looked at it a little bit differently. I thought about it from a hockey match perspective, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with hockey or not, but
oh yes, I am.
Okay, great. Well, hockey has 3 periods, right? So I was a little bit longer in the tooth, if you will, for just halftime when I read his book, and so I've changed it a little bit to a hockey scenario where the first period was study, the second period was some form of success, and it doesn't have to be some wild financial success, just success in what you do. And the third period is significance. And that's really what I have viewed my retirement as, is that third period. And, how can I use what I have learned over time, whether it be study, success, and actually give it back. So yeah, I'm trying to take it up a notch. It's definitely not just like sliding into that third period. It's looking at it as another, kind of period to skate around and chase the puck a little bit here. So, yeah.
So growing up, I grew up in the Seattle area, and we only had a minor league hockey team, the Seattle Thunderbirds at the time. Now there's the Kraken, but yeah. I had season tickets. So yes, I definitely understand the hockey metaphors.
Yeah, well, you were up there close to Canada too, so it's a religion up there, obviously. So
yeah, and I actually lived in Canada for 6 years, so that's kind of crazy. But anyway, you've touched on a few different things, and I think I'd really want to start with what inspired you to write your book, because that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah. So a couple things that came together, what I would say, over a lot of years. As I mentioned, I had been in the wealth management industry, and it was not just, well, it was wealth management of the less than 1%ers, it turns out. I mean, these were folks that had and have tremendous amounts of capital. And so they came to me, or in some cases I worked for just them in a family office setting, or in a multi-family office where I was with a firm. And what would happen is they come, and it would be investment management. But what I was finding was that they were asking oftentimes different questions of me. They were asking questions about priorities or relationships, or what would the money do to my kids, where it was a common kind of thread inside of it. Or, how come I feel like my physical health is not that strong when I have all this wealth available to me, right? And so, you had this thread in my professional career. And then my personal life, look, we all live very large lives. You're about to get married. I am married. I've been married for 30 years, as I said. I have a daughter, and we have careers and we have homes, and they all feel like very large stories. Mm-hmm. But then you get on the 405 freeway, which here in Southern California, as is the artery that is a clogged artery all the time. And you sit on there like I did every day, and you're stuck in traffic, and this kind of pause comes over you, and you say, is this it? There's got to be more. There's a larger story that's going on. And so instead of just thinking about it, that my story, which is very large, was all there was, I was thinking there's got to be more. And I heard that from clients who had all kinds of wealth. I heard it in my own life. And so I endeavored to write about these things, about priorities and principles and passion that I learned about, that I brought to my clients, and helped them transform the way that they looked at their wealth, or their life, and what have you. And that was the genesis and the evolution of this book, The Delta Theorem, that I wrote.
I think that that's absolutely amazing. And, I think it's interesting too, that there's so many people out there that make assumptions that people who are extremely wealthy don't really have problems, or don't really, experience anything that we might, or like, it's the grass is always greener kind of a thing. But the thing is, I mean, it doesn't help your relationship per se. If it doesn't help your health, like you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that I came to really recognize was that there's a lot of facets to wealth. I was a wealth manager, but I view it in a multifaceted way. And so there's financial wealth for sure, but there's relational wealth. That was the question that came up inside of, what's this going to do to my kids? Really, what it was saying was, what's it going to do for my relationship with my kids, or with my spouse, or what have you, right? That's relational wealth. There's also just mental wealth. A lot of times there was an anguish inside of just, having a lot. Now, again, it wasn't like they didn't like that, but it was mental wealth that they wanted to have inside of things. There's spiritual wealth inside of it too, just like a transcendent feeling. It would come up in the form of legacy, and these kinds of questions that would come up. And then there's obviously physical wealth, and that is just them feeling good, or I mean, there's only one ultimate destination for us, and that's, we are going to pass away, right? Mm-hmm. And so them feeling like, how can I live out in a full, vibrant life? I loved how you said, your intro is health and vitality, right? I mean, vitality, wealth is so important. And then there's the wealth of time, right? I mean, oftentimes they had a lot of things that were coming at them. And so it's this whole holistic view of wealth that is all of these pieces together. And, I call it true wealth. Like, how can we be truly wealthy? And that was always kind of that question that I could hear from them saying,
Mm-hmm.
I have wealth. I want to be truly wealthy inside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, I worked with them around that and helped them to discover those things.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, and it's kind of more like a play on words, but there's a huge difference between wealth and having a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
It's not the same thing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, we were called wealth managers, and it just automatically kind of goes towards this financial side of stuff. But like you just said, wealth there's a lot more pieces to wealth. There's financial managers, there's investment managers, and there's wealth managers. And, that's where I just endeavored to go into that space that was the true wealth or truly wealthy in what they did.
Something else that I think is worth noting, especially for coaches out there, is, that there's so many coaches out there that think that they are not capable of coaching people who they consider out of their league. And, and I just feel like what you're showing is that we're all people, we're all humans, we all have our own issues. And if you didn't necessarily have as much money as they did, yet you're just giving them this opportunity to have this kind of wealth that they were craving.
That's right. That's right. And it was fascinating. And if I could tell a story about one particular situation, we again, investment management and wealth management, and you sit down with somebody, you say, let's go through your risk profile. And, we know what capital that they had, and we'll go through a risk profile. And so the question is, what is the money, what's your risk tolerance inside of the money? And this particular client looked and said, listen, here's my risk tolerance. If I lose this money, it'll be like stepping on my grandfather's grave. Okay? That was really interesting, right? Because what the story is that they had basically been the beneficiary of a lot of wealth that was passed down. But the wealth was created by the grandfather, who sacrificed tremendously on behalf of the family, right? And this particular beneficiary, who was my client, understood that the nature of the risk was not how risky the investments should be, although that was the ultimate kind of like discussion outside of that. It was her relational feeling towards a now past grandfather and how she would feel about that, inside of it. That was just, and to be able to step into that as not as a financial peer, because I didn't have that kind of wealth, but as a human being, to be able to just say, okay, tell us about that a little bit more was very, very, it was just, that was the value add that we brought to the table for them. And then we crafted legacy things and financial, arrangements and all the things that kind of built inside of that, because we understood and she understood that was the most important thing for her inside of what her capital meant to her.
I really appreciate that, because a lot of people wouldn't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even dawn on them. It's like, oh, this is my money now.
Yeah, right. No, it was, and listen, it was just a wonderful kind of human condition, us connecting at that level, because honestly, I did not expect that to be her answer. I didn't. And when it was, the depth of that it was beautiful, actually. I mean, it's really, really a beautiful, statement on it. And I felt pressure on her behalf as a result of that, which was a good pressure to basically have.
Yeah, I know that I would probably feel something along the lines of, oh my goodness, I want to make this, I totally understand. I want to respect this and, go the extra mile to make sure. Right. Because that's so human. It's, it's vulnerability, showing, what you're really about. She could have easily said a million different things and not been honest, like completely honest. Still gotten the same results, but it was just to make that kind of impression. I love that, that she was able to do that.
Yeah, it was terrific. Really was terrific.
That's amazing. we're sort of talking around about a lot of different things, but the thing that I really want to touch on, and we're going to go to commercial soon, but it's like there's a leadership component of like being in charge of your own joy, happiness, success, instead of blaming other people or putting it on other people. Yes, you may receive certain things, like, she received this inheritance, but what you do with what you're given is 100% up to you. And, is this like something that you take seriously for, showing people like, okay, it's time let's start developing some leadership skills?
Yes, and that's really what I touch on inside the Delta Theorem book, actually, because the book itself is a framework that works through a lot of these things. It's not a wealth management book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book that talks about things like purpose and priorities and principles and passion, and works through those things, which are all the things you're talking about in terms of leadership and personal responsibility inside of those things. It's a framework, as I described, for coaches, really, or parents, frankly, to go through and to clarify some of these things. I'll go through the details of it, of what this Delta Theorem is, which I love and want to share with your folks. But it's really, that's exactly what that is all about.
I love that, because, being able to visually sort of wrap your head around a concept that doesn't necessarily have a picture. It's like trying to sell coaching. It's not like a car where here's the object,
Right.
but turning some coaching type of experience into something tangible is an amazing feat, because not everybody can do that. So I want to commend you on that. We do need to go to a commercial break, so we're going to be back in just a minute. For those of you who are watching us live, thank you so much for being here. When we come back, we are going to talk with Bret about the book and about what the theorem is, and make this tangible for everyone who's watching. So we'll be back in just a minute.
When drug or alcohol addiction take over, things begin to disappear. Your friends, your family, and eventually, you. Recommended by Dr. Phil, New Method Wellness can help get your life back with individualized treatment plans for dual diagnosis clients. New Method Wellness provides the most highly credentialed treatment in a safe and welcome environment. Call New Method Wellness for your free consultation and ask about our national accreditations. Together, we can put the pieces back together.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's bring our guest, Bret, back onto the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Yeah. So as I mentioned right before we went to commercial break, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your book and explain sort of, I mean, I was lucky enough to hear privately, but we're here to share it with everyone else. So
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a story. First of all, it goes way back to my college, just after college, because it ties in with it. I didn't really have two nickels to rub together as growing up. And when I graduated college, I had a time period before I started my career, just a short time frame in this summer. So I actually did this backpack trip through Europe years ago. Had a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a Eurail pass and a hitchhiker's thumb was basically what it was, right? And so, spent a little bit of time. One of the places that I ended up in was Florence, Italy. I was fortunate enough to be there. And what happened was I went into a museum in Florence, and I found that along the lining of this hallway of this museum were blocks of marble that were unfinished works of Michelangelo, it turned out. And what it was like a block of marble with an arm that was coming out of it, the perfectly crafted arm, or half a torso, or just things that you could see the actual physical nature of what was being done, but it was unfinished. They're actually called the prisoners, it turns out. I didn't know that, but it really made sense because they look like they're trapped in these blocks of marble. There's 4 of them. And then as you walk down the hallway and turn, at least at the time, turn the corner, at the end of this hallway is the David. And it is the most spectacular thing you could possibly ever imagine. I mean, literally 14 feet tall, massive, perfect. And you're just blown away. And I was not a big art, person. The first test I ever failed as a kid was name the 4 seasons. And I said football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. Because in my house, those were the only seasons that we knew. So, what did I know? But I knew that the David was just a breathtaking thing. Here's why I tell that story. Because years later, when I sat down to write the book, it came back to me why that was such a great layout. Because what it showed to me was that it's kind of like our lives. We start off with this raw material that, maybe has some flaws or what have you. And then people come along, coaches or parents or teachers or whatever, and they chip away and, we start to come alive inside of this kind of thing. And then, of course, at the end of it is the splendor that is us. Okay. Mm-hmm. Splendor that is us. That's really what the Delta Theorem is, in a sense, all about. It's about how do we come alive so that we can also be truly wealthy in the way that we talked about true wealth before. So I'm going to blow the mind of your folks here, just like I blew your mind. I came up with this. I don't know how, but it just came up like this. It is a math equation that looks like this. Alpha over P cubed by E F squared equals delta. That's the Delta Theorem. But here's what it means. Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. In this framework, what it represents is your powerful why, your reason for being, your purpose. It's the first thing, your one thing. Mm-hmm. It sits on top of a foundation, which is P cubed, which represents your priorities, your principles, and your passion. Those 3 Ps. What I was finding is that with my clients, with myself, with anybody, if I looked at them and said, okay, let's talk about what's your purpose? Julianne, what's your purpose? You might look and you might say to me, Bret, I have no idea. It's too big of a question. And by the way, if I answer it, does that mean that it never changes? Mm-hmm. So it's such an overwhelming question for people because of optionality on change and just the magnitude of it. And yet knowing our powerful why is really, really valuable for getting through life. I don't start there. I start with the foundation. I say to you, Julianne, what are your priorities? I'm about to get married, Bret, in June. I have this show that I'm really, so passionate about, and I'm a coach, and, these are all priorities. Can work with those things. Tell me, Julianne, what do you stand for? What are non-negotiables in your life? What are your principles by which you live? For me, I'll tell you, one of mine is, it comes from a song by Justin Timberlake and Chris Stapleton. It says, sometimes the greatest way to say something is to say nothing at all. Sometimes the greatest way to say something is to say nothing at all. And it's just a principle that, like, wow, maybe I don't need to speak all the time inside this kind of thing. So, you know, we all have certain principles. It could be from a religious upbringing. It could be just from parents. It could be from a song that, like, just resonates in a sense with us, but it's something we stand for. And then passion is, Julianne, tell me, what makes your hair on fire? What do you just love to do? Okay. And so you look at those three things, which are easier to answer. And what I found was that when I would work with folks around those three things, and I lined them up like Olympic rings, instead of these overlapping things, right in the middle where they all intersected is where a person's purpose starts to come out. You could start to, like, hear them, and you could help them, like, come up with their own aha moment inside of, like, oh, now I know what my purpose is. My purpose happens to be, I love to inspire people to come alive. That's the story of, like, the David, right? I love the concept of, like, people coming alive, because when you come alive, look out, right? You know, when people are really alive, look out. Stuff starts to happen. You create wealth, you make a difference, all these things. So that's the alpha over P cubed, which is all theoretical, truthfully. It's like, it's that thing that you could say, that sounds good. Now what do I do? By, which is multiplied, E, which stands for effort. What are you going to do to make something happen out of this? How are you going to activate your purpose? What are the things that you can do inside of these things? What do you train yourself up? How do you get to a flow state? You know, these various things to activate our purpose and our principles, our passion, priorities. And then F stands for failure. And usually failure is viewed as a negative. It always was in my life. But what I learned, and this is the only place math comes in, is that when you square a negative, it becomes a positive. And so the concept here is the learning that comes from failure. So if you look at all of that in this framework, alpha, which is your purpose, which sits on top of a foundation of my priorities, my principles, my passion, supercharged by effort, and the learning that comes from failure, all that equals delta, which, back to the Greek alphabet, delta is the symbol for change, for making a difference, for having an impact. So the delta theorem is basically this framework that is in the form of a math equation that's not math at all. It's really just to help us all know the elements that come into, how can I put myself in the best position, not a guaranteed position, the best position to make a change, to make a difference, to have impact, to not be sitting on the 405 freeway wondering to myself, really? That's it? Like, you know, there's got to be more. And what can we do inside of this kind of stuff? What can I do for myself? How can I train my daughter up in this? How can I coach people in this so that we can come alive and be, you know, all of us, that statue of the David that we all are, you know, in our splendor, to be able to do that. That's what the delta theorem is. So I wrote this book about that and went through every chapter is, tell me about priorities. How do you, you know, what are they? What, you know, what do you do with that? Principles, a great one, right? Principles, where do you come up with them? Sometimes principles are really, really challenging, right? From this perspective. We've been around people that are so principle minded that they are horrible to be with. You know, I call it the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, right? There's no letter of the law, that there's no spirit of the law inside of it. And so this counterbalance of passion with priorities and principles that all kind of counterbalance with each other, you know, that a purpose would come out of it. That's basically what I wrote about in the book.
I love that. And when's it coming out?
It's coming out May 23rd, which is a week from tomorrow. Yay. Yeah, so very excited. Very excited.
That is exciting. You know, I was just thinking about how everything goes together, and in failure in particular, people are always trying to avoid it, but that's the way to get anywhere. I mean,
it really is.
part of the process.
It is part of the process, and it usually stems from taking risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't take risk anywhere, guaranteed to fail, because you'll never take a chance on anything, right? So it's really fascinating. It's that thing of like putting your heart out there and putting it out there again, right? But learning from those kinds of things, which is really critical.
Yeah, and it could be scary, but worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Very,
so,
very true.
I want to touch on this idea of priorities for a moment, because I think that this is really important, especially because of people such as myself who I work from home. And, I hate to say this, but I have a slight TV addiction. I don't even like watching it. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where but I like having it on, and I can sit there instead of doing something that I actually want to do, because it's easier and it's okay enough, and then, I would argue, and then also argue again. But I would argue and say, well, that's my priority because that's what I'm making time for. But then the other part of me is like, but that's not my priority. That's not how I want to live. However, that is exactly how I'm living. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think there's a difference between priorities that I'm talking about and prioritization, right? Like we prioritize tasks and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
And we put together lists of things that we should or shouldn't do and that kind of stuff. I'm more talking about priorities that are those things that are the most important in our life, right? What are those things that are the most important? Let me say, who's to say that you watching TV is not a support for your priority of health being like rest and relaxation?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not looking for you to have justification inside of this, but I think a lot of times what I found is that we hear what we think we should be doing, and we have yet to clarify what is most important. And if we can clarify those things that are what are most important, like those big broader categories like health or family, or there's only really a list of about 12 that are like the top things. The problem is that we want all 12 of them to be our priorities, and we don't have the ability to do that. So I go through a process in the book where I talk about, let's narrow it down to the top 3. Because when you can narrow those down to the top 3 that are really the most important, then you can understand what your powerful why really is. I mean, that's why it's important from that standpoint. And there's just cues that come in. I touched on them previously. Cues are life events. I had a client whose he and his wife's priority was to get their business started, and then she got pregnant. And the room that was supposed to be their office turned into the nursery. And their priorities changed completely. They didn't look at it like, good, bad, or indifferent. It's just that life events happened, priorities changed, purpose changed inside of that. And what their why was suddenly became different as a result of that. That's what I love about the fact that priorities as a foundation for your why. It takes the ability for the option of your why to change over time, and it leaves it on the table. Why? Because priorities change. I'm retired now. It's different than when I was, starting off in my career and trying to make something like that happen. So, that's what I'd say in terms of those kinds of things.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think it adds clarity, for people. And what I keep hearing is that's really what this is all about, is like actually taking a look and figuring it out for ourselves, instead of leaving it up to the I don't knows and I don't want to commit to this because I don't want to be stuck with it forever.
Right. Well, listen, you're a coach, and you know that the value is, creating aha moments for people. I can tell you what you should do, Julianne, but frankly, you need to figure out like what it is that really is important for you. And then it's also that accountability around that kind of thing. Like, really, this is what I have oftentimes, questions of clients, like, they'll say something and it's like, really, that's really your most important thing here? And just diving in and letting them kind of understand this kind of, people laugh. I said, listen, I'm a deep tissue massage artist here. You want to get a nice little, kind of like nice thing like I like to get. Okay. Don't cut it. Like deep tissue is like, okay, let's dive into this. Because if it really is what you want here about making a difference and having an impact and that kind of stuff, then come on, let's dig into this.
I love that too. And you touched on this, and I just kind of want to highlight it is, there's this idea that it's supposed to look a certain way, or it's the shoulds. And, I'll give you myself as an example. I've never been married. I'm 45 years old, and I can't even tell you how many times, and it took me a while. I said yes a couple of times. It never actually ended up happening, but, it was like all this pressure from society telling me, oh, well, you still have time, or, things like that. And then it's like, well, you could still have kids. I'm like, but I don't want kids.
Yeah.
But if I could have easily given in and done exactly, and I almost did a couple times because that's what I thought I wanted, because that's what I was told I should want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, there's studies that have shown that family of origin, just cultural upbringing, has impact on priorities as well. Like you come from a culture that family is a big deal. It is highly likely that you are thinking to yourself, family's got to be a big deal for me. You know what I'm saying? So, and it's not to say that it's not or it shouldn't be, but these cultural influences or social influences that can come inside of these things are there factors. They're not bad. They're not wrong. They're just an awareness of these things and understanding. Is this really what's important to you? Or somebody else is telling you that this is what's important to you? That's a real important distinction to be able to come to.
It is. It makes me think of the meatloaf story. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't. Tell me.
So this woman was making meatloaf, and she was putting it in the pan. She chopped out both ends. You know what I'm talking about. And they finally figure out, well, like the reason why they were chopping out the ends of the meatloaf is because the pan was smaller when grandma was making it. It's like automatic. That's just how they were doing it, because that's how they were taught without even really understanding why.
Right.
We do that with so many things. It's not even really our thoughts. It's just what we were told, and we just don't question it. So,
I mean, principles is a good example of that as well, right? I mean, and for good reason. Some principles that are handed down from centuries are really great principles to have, right? I mean, they're not bad. But if you're not clear on those principles, and more importantly, if you're not living by those, guess what's going to happen? You're going to feel this incongruency in your life, and you're not going to be feeling well, right? You own your wellness. That's what you're saying. Own your wellness. So
own it.
Very important. Yeah,
exactly. On that note, it is time for us to go to another commercial break. So we're going to be back in just a minute. And for those of you who are watching us on demand, because you're not live, I wanted to give a shout out to you as well. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, it is time for us to go to commercial. When we come back, we're going to be talking more about this idea, the theorem, and about how you can start implementing things like this in the parts into your life as well. So we'll be right back.
Welcome to E360 TV, the live streaming and on-demand destination for influential voices and enlightened audiences. We offer trending, grassroots, and purpose-driven content across a diverse range of interests. E360 TV is more than just watching programs. We offer the ability to interact with live shows connecting audiences to real, authentic influencers and storytellers while streaming to millions of devices. Real experiences. Raw conversation. One destination for it all. S6E26 TV.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's bring our guest, Bret, back onto the show. Thank you for being here. Before we continue, I want you to share what's behind you on your wall there and the significance.
Yeah, so it's a real quick statement: with purpose, on purpose. Obviously, what I've talked about is a lot to do with purpose, right? Alpha, and it's that intentionality. With purpose, on purpose. What are we doing? Life. How are we coming alive with this? So, come alive with purpose, on purpose. That's kind of my statement here.
I love that. I just think that's so. I mean, it's a quick, easy way to get your point across.
Yeah.
And it's catchy. I love catchy, as
Thank you.
you could tell by now.
My wife is like, "You're the king of mantras over there," and I'm like, "Listen, I'm just a simple man. Quite frankly, I am. I'm simple, and if it like sticks and it makes me remember something like the Delta Theorem, then I go with that."
And I like that because it makes it easier for other people to, physically. It's like it's a lot of concept smashed into something small. So to be able to physically be like, okay, this means this, it's a visual representation of a huge concept that can, streamline your entire life, basically. Right. And I love that. I'm curious, you mentioned before that a lot of people struggle with their big, why and like the purpose part, because it's like, do I have to, like you said before, do I have to pick one thing and then that's it for the rest of my life, etc. But is there other things that you've seen that people maybe they are just kind of scratching their heads, or maybe even, using other people's ideas as their own, as opposed to really thinking about what it is that they want?
Yeah, I think that happens, fairly often across a lot of the first part of the equation: the purpose, the priorities, the principles, even the passion. Like all those things, people oftentimes do kind of gravitate towards what somebody else might tell them, or what they think that it should be, or the shoulds, as you described, previously, and that kind of thing. And listen, they're not wrong as long as it really does become something that is theirs, right? It is truly is theirs. Things that are handed down from me to my daughter. I mean, I wouldn't have shared these things with her if I didn't think that they were value adds to her life. And a lot of times they were born out of F squared in my life. I failed. I learned from it. I want to give it to her so she doesn't go through F squared inside of this kind of thing. And yet she has to own them. She's got to own that message. She's got to want it and really kind of grasp it. So, again, it's not that they're bad that you take them on. It's just that you ultimately receive them and own them. Like your wellness. I love that, of your show. Own your wellness. That's really, critical inside of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you keep saying, it's not bad, because it's not bad. It's just, but is it yours? Do you want it to be yours?
That's right. That's right. I do a lot of work inside the area of effort. Okay. And one of the things, and this is, talking about health and vitality, that's a lot of times inside the coaching where that comes into to practice. because it is where things get activated. You know, one of the things that I talk about with inside the book, and I work with clients, is around this concept of what I call the 6 facets. And what the 6 facets is this. Think of a Rubik's Cube. It has 6 facets to it. There's 9 tiles on each one of those facets, but there's 6 different colors. What I say with clients is, listen, those 6 facets are these 6 areas, in a sense, of life, of activation. The spiritual, the physical, the instinctual, the natural, the emotional, and the mental. Those are core competencies that we have as human beings. There's more, but just simplifying it. And those core competencies usually are intermeshed with each other. That's why I like this concept of the Rubik's Cube. See, I don't try to solve for my physical alone, because my physical is impacted by emotional, the mental, the instinctual, the natural, the spiritual, you name it. My life is really more like the Rubik's Cube that's a 3-dimensional, thing that is spinning, and these things are interacting with each other. And what I try to say to folks, and for myself, is, have you ever said you were half-hearted? And usually half-hearted is because some of those 6 facets aren't working together. They're dormant, or they're empty, or maybe you solved all one side, but guess what? That's not the way life works. What I say is wholehearted is where all of those sides are constantly spinning and they're interacting with each other. So I might say something like, what's a really challenging thing that I need to do or a client needs to do? Well, you could say it's a physical thing. How about going in and having a conversation with your spouse? Maybe the physical side of that is being aware that, the hair on the back of your neck is kind of like, ooh. Or the emotional side is, and the mental is anguish, and the instinctual is your gut is telling you, and the natural, kind of like your personality is like, I'm like, this guy that's, totally different than, and the spiritual, the transcendent side stuff builds into it too. So the training inside of effort, is to work on those kinds of things so that you're wholehearted. That's wellness, right? Wellness is when that wholehearted nature, those 6 facets are actually working together. Guess what happens? They change all the time because external forces come at us all the time. And we need to be able to train up inside of these kind of things. The physical side is easy. I said the 9 tiles. So take the 9 tiles of the physical. It could be stuff like fueling. That's a physical. It's not just strength or stamina. It's sleep. It's hydration. Those are all tiles that are there. And if I show up to the office and I didn't sleep, and I'm having that crucial conversation with my boss, and it's mental and it's emotional and there's instincts associated with it, and the sleep is spun to the other side or the physical is spun to the other side because I didn't sleep well or I'm not hydrated, that's where this thing's kind of come into play. So, really important of the activation part of this Delta theorem to put you in the best position to make a difference in your environments.
A couple things. One is I think using the idea of the Rubik's Cube is fabulous because it makes so much sense to me on a science more level than just kind of like woo woo. Right. Yeah. I get it. I can, physically, or I can imagine that. I can see it. But the other thing too is, just the idea of effort. And I think I said this to you when we first spoke. It's kind of like the movie The Secret, where, they missed the whole effort part of it. I mean, not that you can necessarily, I'm not trying to put the movie down. I'm just saying though, like, literally sitting in your chair dreaming about a Ferrari doesn't mean it's going to show up at your front door. I mean, it's part of it is visualization, but what about the actual act of, fill in the blank?
Exactly. And another part that I talk about is a concept of crawl, walk, run. Yes. Right. Too often we get into the effort. And what do? We set out plans that are sprinting. We're sprinting. And then we wonder, wait, what happened here? How come I didn't meet this goal? Well, how about you just start to crawl, right? And then learn to walk and then learn to run, right? Like, so maybe you don't have that conversation with your boss immediately. Maybe you have it with a peer or a friend to like crawl that way. You know, you're still testing your gut instinct and emotions and mental and that kind of stuff. But, you know, crawl, walk, run versus run and then fail. Not gonna swear a failure. You know, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, you're gonna pull a muscle.
And then you're definitely squaring up that muscle failure.
I can't even tell you how many times I've let that pendulum swing from one side all the way over to the other. No in between.
Delayed gratification is delayed gratification is not something that we naturally enjoy.
Oh my goodness, that's yeah. I like the idea of the crawl, walk, run. I use it all the time when I'm talking about having your own TV show because it's, you know, you don't go from, you know, zero to Oprah. I mean, even Oprah was fired when she was 23, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, we are running low on time. We only have a few minutes left, about 3 to be exact. So is there anything that you'd love to share that maybe you haven't, or even if you'd like to reiterate something that you mentioned already?
Yeah, listen, I would love for folks to buy the book on Amazon. Check it out. You can connect with me with connectwithbret.com. There's all kinds of connections there. It's, you know, my social media accounts and other websites that are the Delta Theorem website and those kinds of things. You can find it there. It's just easier. Connect with Bret. You can find that there. But it comes out on Amazon on May 23rd. Love for your audience to check it out and see what they think. You know, write a review. I'd love to get feedback on that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited that it's coming out so quickly. That's it's kind of like giving birth to, you know, this whole concept. It is scary and new,
it's very scary. I mean, that's some of the things that I, you know, just kind of learned. You put yourself out there, you know, it's like, you know, the scariest thing was handing the first chapter to my wife and have her take a look at it. I was like, oh, please, I hope she likes it, you know.
I totally get that. I've been so many times like, don't read it, honey. I'm like, wait a second, how am I supposed to let everybody read this?
Exactly.
So funny. Yeah. But anyway, Bret, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to buying your book because I think it's amazing. I think you're amazing. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And everyone, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining us. We will be back this week on Thursday, so we'll see you then.